Installing your IE cold air intake on your VW MK7 or Audi AV 2.0T or 1.8T engine is incredibly easy and requires only a few simple tools and can be done in just a little bit of your time, and I'm going to show you how. Before you get started, make sure you have access to a basic toolkit that includes a ratchet, some sockets, a good pair of pliers, some Allen wrenches, and some hex drivers. And before you uninstall anything from the car, make sure you download the full color install guide from the website. Get familiar with the install process and unpack your entire IE cold air intake kit and make sure all the quantities of all the parts are there and accounted for. We're going to start the whole install process by getting the stock intake out of there. It's super easy, and we're going to start by removing this front air dam. There's 2 Torx screws. Your stock intake hold is clamped on. You're just going to want to push open on that and pull up to release it. The stock intake is connected to the factory turbo inlet pipe with a large spring clamp. If you have a spring clamp tool for this, it'll make it super easy. If not, you're just going to want a pair of pliers that you can open up really wide. And we're going to disconnect that all the way. Now there's no need to remove the forward one because we're just going to pull this whole thing out at once. But first, we need to remove this vacuum line. And make sure you don't snag this coolant line too much. Now, I'm going to start by grabbing down here in the lower corner and just pulling upwards to remove the grommets from the pull. There's no bolts or anything, it's just a friction push down hold. Now, if you've never had this out before, you're going to want to make sure you pull out slowly because it may have a secondary injection hose on it. This one doesn't, so I can pull the whole thing out. And with the stock intake out of the way, we can remove the whole frontal air dam. In this next step, we need to remove the factory coolant line. Make sure the car has had plenty of time to sit here and cool down so you don't burn yourself with any hot coolant. You want that coolant to be completely settled and cool as possible. Since the factory coolant line runs over the top of the intake, that is going to be in the way of your much larger aftermarket one, so our new supplied one is going to sit low and under it. We've included 2 coolant port cap-offs. These are just here to keep coolant from spilling out while you work around it. I'm going to take a dirty rag, and this is just to minimize some of my coolant mess, because there is no way around spilling a bit of coolant. Start by removing the spring clamps. And with the rag in place, get one of your caps ready. Just like that. Same thing on the bottom. Take the included new clamps and pre-install those on your new coolant line. All right, now we're going to, just like stock, we're going to try and do this as quickly as possible. We're going to start by tightening the upper clamp first. Make sure it's slid all the way over. You can feel where the hard line is. Now, before tightening this lower one, make sure that this is orientated correctly. If this hose is too far in either direction, you risk rubbing the hose with the new heat shield on your intake. So we're going to want to put it perfectly straight and then just turn it a little bit driver. Now, as you tighten these clamps, keep in mind that this is plastic. You want it tight, but you don't want it so tight that you're going to break this plastic nipple off, because you don't want to be replacing any of your coolant hoses. If you made any messes, take some time to clean that up now. Now we're ready to put the intake together. Your intake is going to be shipped in multiple pieces. All you're going to need for this step is an Allen wrench. Start by unpacking all of the Allens in your hardware kit and pre-installing your little washers on them. It'll be a lot easier to install if those are already on it. Line up your heat shield. Now we're just going to loosely install these for now. Okay, and once all 4 of these are in, you can go ahead and tighten it. You may have noticed your cold air intake kit includes 2 similar looking turbo inlet pipes. One is for the stock plastic smaller inlet, and one is for our much larger cast aluminum upgrade. Make sure you use the one that's appropriately sized for the turbo inlet. And if you're installing it with the stock one, make sure you hold on to the larger one so you can upgrade later. Since we're installing our intake with the larger turbo inlet pipe, I won't be needing these. I'm going to take the time now to loosely install all of my hose clamps. Now we can outfit the smaller silicone. Again, I'm going to put on my clamps. Install the included vacuum barb. Earlier, remember I said your intake may have a secondary injection port on it. If it does, you're going to need to install this guy. If it doesn't have it, you can use a cap. You can go ahead and tighten this clamp now. Start the intake installation by sliding the rear inlet hose onto the turbo inlet. And make sure that clamp is positioned in a way that you can get to it and tighten it later. We're going to want to rotate this so it's pretty much centered perfectly between the battery box and the engine, making sure it's not going to rub on the coolant line or any other section in here. Your kit will include these nifty mount grommets. These will mount your intake as secure and strong as a stock intake. The lettering and part number go on the bottom. Make sure those are fully installed and they can rotate by hand. We're now ready to put the heat shield in the car. Don't rush this step. It is easy, but there's a couple things to look out for. Start by making sure the whole dam slides underneath the plastics. This bolt should be on the bottom, not on the top. Line it up with the grommets. Make sure nothing is interfering. This is a good time to take a look at the coolant hose and make sure it's not going to be rubbing. If it looks like that's going to rub, go ahead and loosen that bolt and readjust it. Ours looks perfect. When you're ready, I like to start in the back and push down until that's fully seated. You'll know it's fully seated when this conical cap is all the way up and out. If you get that right and you make sure those are fully seated and the grommets are correct, there will be no rattling, and this intake will give you life of just silent operation without any weird rubs or rattles. Remember that vacuum hose we removed earlier? Install that to the bottom of your barb. And then line up your silicone coupler here. Now it's time to install the hard intake pipe. Notice the inside of your silicone has an edge. When you install these, you want to install it until they bottom out. That'll make sure they're fully in the right position. You're just going to kind of take your time here to massage this a little bit. What you're looking for is that it's seated on both stops, on both couplers, without any crazy pulling, and there's no tension on it. Once you're happy with that, line up all of your clamps. And starting from the center, tighten them. Now you want these tight, but there's no boost pressure going through them. They don't need to be like cranked down on until you bend the pipe or anything. Double check all your lines, make sure it's easy to get to, that you can get to your caps. There's nothing crazy. I'm happy with all that. Now take the last Allen bolt that was included with your intake kit. Install that good and tight. Take the biggest clamp in your kit, slide it over the filter, and this installs directly to the velocity stack. For the most horsepower, make sure your IE logo is facing straight up and down. If you're leaving this as an open filter intake and not installing a lid, take the included bulb trim, and install this the entire length of the heat shield. This will help seal the entire intake off from the hood. If you're going to install this with an optional cold air intake lid, then you're not going to need this. The IE cold air intake has two optional flavors of lid. You can do the carbon fiber for a very stylish motorsport look, or the polymer. These are both completely optional or not required for install, and you can either purchase them at the time you buy your intake or upgrade it down the road. Doesn't matter if you go with the carbon or the poly, the install is exactly the same, and I'm going to show you how to do it today using the poly lid. To install a lid, you need to line up all the threaded holes with the intake heat shield. Start by sliding this front hole underneath, and everything will just slide right on. Get all of the smaller Allens ready by pre-installing the small washers. You'll see I'm installing these, but they're still really quite loose. I find the best way to get it lined up correctly is to get two in on opposite ends of each other. And take your time lining the threads up. They should go in with no resistance and thread in very easily. These are really small bolts with really fine threads. You do not want to cross thread them at all. If you cross thread them, the chances of them rattling out are pretty high. So really take your time here, make sure everything is lined up. You'll notice I'm still just going basically finger tight. And we're gonna go finger tight until every bolt is in. Once I have all the bolts in, I'm gonna start from the center and get them nice and snug, going crisscrossing my way through all of them. Once I've kind of cross-hatched all of them, I'm going to go through one more time and just make sure they all are nice and snug. Don't wrench on these crazy hard. You don't want to strip them out. But they do want to be tight enough they're not going to rattle out. The last step is one more bolt. Now keep in mind, if you don't have an intake lid, there is no mount bolt on this side. And that's all it took for me to inject this Mark 7 with an awesome upgrade, with more power, more sound, and awesome styling. If you have any questions at all about this intake or the installing process, please reach out to our awesome team of mod gurus. They have all the answers. And to find more upgrades like this, check out performancebyE.com. And don't forget to live fast and buy fun.